Hi there. I wanted to take a quick look at how LinkedIn and the other social networks run their ad auctions. If you're spending any money on social ads at all, it's really a good idea to have at least a basic understanding of this. Because if you don't, it's simply really easy to pour a lot of money down the drain. So we're all familiar with things like an art auction from movies and books. We all have a pretty good sense of how that works. The ad auction is similar, but there's also enough key differences that it's important to point them out. It may not be quite as fun as bidding on a $30 million painting, but if you're spending money on ads for your business, it's really good to have a grip on this stuff. So the first thing I'm going to cover is what's called the second price auction. The second thing I'm going to cover is the fact that it takes a lot more, unlike an art auction, it takes a lot more than a high bid to win the auction. And the third thing is that winning the auction means you're going to win the high converters in your audience. And this has to do with how the social networks subsegment an overall audience into different buckets. But let's go back to an art auction to get an understanding of what this second price auction concept is. So here we are at an art auction. We all have a really good idea of how this works. There's multiple bids. The highest bid wins, and whatever the highest bid is, that's what ends up getting paid. So in this case, someone bid $300, they've won the auction, they're going to pay $300 for that painting. That's a first price auction. A second price auction works differently. In a second price auction, the highest bidder still wins, but they're only paying as much as the second highest bid, which in this case would be $200, plus just enough to beat that second highest bid. So they're not paying $300. They're only paying $200.01, which is 1 penny more than the second highest bid. That is how a second price auction fundamentally works. In the case of LinkedIn and the other social networks, though, it takes a lot more than a high bid to win the auction, and that really has to do with ad quality and relevance. And this is a function of how accurate your audience targeting is, combined with how compelling your creative message is to that audience. So the networks, the social networks rather, what they do is they combine your bid with your quality and relevance to give you a combined score. And it's really your combined score that is what is entered into the ad auction, and the highest combined score wins the auction. They're all a little bit different in how they treat it, but of course we all start with a bid. In the case of LinkedIn, they look at something called relevance score, and they actually look at historical campaign performance from an advertiser. So if you've run a lot of LinkedIn ads in the past and haven't had great success with that, it can be really hard to get a high relevance score. But they do also look at current engagement for your ads. So they look at likes, shares, and comments. So that is baked in. In the case of Facebook, they talk about ad quality and relevance. Relevance score is a metric if you're familiar with Facebook campaigns at all. It's kind of a confusing metric because it's kind of a proxy for quality. But what this boils down to is making sure your ad creative is really compelling and relevant to the audience that you're targeting. And Twitter looks at the 3 R's: resonance, relevance, and recency. Resonance is engagement, so things like retweets. Relevance, again, comes back to how relevant your message or your tweet is to the audience that you're targeting. And recency, Twitter likes fresh content, fresh tweets, so they bake that in as well. There's a third factor only in the case of Facebook. I'm not going to go too deeply into it, but every Facebook campaign is optimized against a specific event that you want your audience to take, and Facebook estimates the likelihood of your target audience taking action against that optimization event. This all gets combined. The actual equation is not shared, but these all get combined into a combined score, and that's what enters the auction, and the highest combined score wins. So why is it important to win the auction? Let's say this is your target audience. You've got different genders, you've got different ages, maybe slightly different interests and behaviors. Within this audience, there's a number of different buckets. There's people at the bottom of the ladder. This is the bucket of people that are least likely to convert. They're probably not going to do anything to respond to you. Then as we go up the ladder, we get somewhat likely to convert. We get more likely to convert. And then at the top, we get something like highly likely to convert. By winning the auction, your message, your ad rather, is going to be delivered to people at the higher end of this ladder. If you're not winning the auction, your ads can still be served, but your ads are going to be served to the people at the lower end of this ladder because your combined score is not high enough to reach the people at the high end. Really important to understand this. really a waste of money if you're not reaching the people at the top of this ladder. So how do you do that? How do you actually win the auction? And this is ultimately a recap of everything that I've talked about so far. So number one is accurate audience targeting. Make sure your audience is really dialed in. And this is where remarketing comes into play. You should try to get your audience into a remarketing audience as soon as you possibly can, because you know that those people already have an affinity for your brand, your product, or your message. The second big thing is great creative. There's absolutely no substitute for this. This has to do with a really compelling ad. It's really relevant to your audience. So really understanding what makes your audience tick and writing your creative to appeal to that. The third thing is aggressive bidding. And this is not necessary in every single situation. There are some where it's not necessary. I'm not going to go into that. But if you do not have great quality and relevance, aggressive bidding can really help you to get a higher combined score to win the ad auction. So those are kind of the three factors that you really need to look at and make the most of when creating a campaign in order to win the auction. That's in a nutshell. I hope you got some value out of that. Thanks very much for watching, and I will see you again soon.